London, 1952. Earl's Court. A cheap hotel corridor, the kind where wallpaper peels at the corners and the carpet smells of decades of other people's lives. Police flashbulbs pop in the half-dark. A covered body. A knife on the floor. A man in handcuffs, shaken. His name, Dennis Muldowney. He's just stabbed a woman to death. Not a stranger. A coworker. Someone he'd become obsessed with. The woman on that floor had crossed frozen borders in the dead of night. She'd faced the Gestapo in a Hungarian prison and talked her way out. She'd walked into occupied France and bluffed Nazi officers into releasing condemned men. She'd carried intelligence that fed into Allied strategy at the highest levels. Winston Churchill reportedly called her his favorite spy. And she dies here. Not on a mission. Not in enemy territory. On a hotel carpet, working as a stewardess on a cruise ship. There was no state funeral. No Churchill eulogy. Just a short column in the papers about a murdered Polish expat. A life that had burned white-hot in wartime, extinguished in peacetime by a man with a knife and an obsession. When the person your prime minister once called his favorite spy dies on a hotel floor, forgotten and unprotected, you have to ask, what happened between the medals and the murder? What does favorite actually mean when the lights go out and the war is over? If you're already feeling that gap between what she gave and what she got back, stay with this. Because that gap, that howling distance between service and abandonment, that's the whole story. Her name was Christina Skarbek. Born 1908, minor Polish aristocracy. Not wealthy enough to be idle, not poor enough to be invisible. She skied. She spoke multiple languages. She was stubborn, independent, uncomfortable in any box anyone tried to put her in. September 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland from the west, Soviet Union from the east. Her country is carved up in weeks. Christina escapes to France, then to London, part of the flood of Polish exiles watching their homeland disappear. Early 1940. She doesn't wait for someone to recruit her. She walks into British intelligence and volunteers. This is before the Special Operations Executive formally exists, before the structures are even in place. She offers to go back. Back into occupied Europe. Back into the fire. Most people waited to be called. She walked in and offered herself. What does that tell you about the kind of person we're dealing with? And more importantly, what does it tell you about the kind of person a system like that will use, and then discard? The British give her a new name, Christine Granville. Easier to pronounce, easier to file, easier to forget. She becomes one of the first female agents working for what will become SOE, Special Operations Executive. Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, the organization tasked with sabotage, subversion, intelligence gathering in occupied territories. The unit built on the principle, set Europe ablaze. Christine Granville will do exactly that. But fire consumes everything, including the people who light it. Let's pause here and paint the picture. Britain is living inside in early 1940. France falls. The evacuation at Dunkirk. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Churchill becomes Prime Minister in May 1940, and he's betting everything on three things: the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, and intelligence. Because Britain doesn't have the industrial base Germany has. It doesn't have the manpower. What it has is a network, SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service, SOE, and later, Ultra, the code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park. Churchill is leaning on information, on sabotage, on resistance movements, on the idea that you can tie up an army with a handful of determined people in the right place at the right time. And Christine Granville becomes one of those people. We love the myth of Churchill. Cigar in hand, defiant speeches, outsmarting Hitler from the war rooms. But what happens to that story when you start asking, who brought him the information that let him think at all? Who crossed the borders? Who carried the microfilm? Who risked the torture cell so that a man in a bunker in London could move pins on a map? Because here's the thing about legends. They're almost always built on the unmarked graves of people whose names we can't remember. Christine Granville is one of those names. And the fact that you might not have heard it before you clicked on this video, that's not an accident. That's a choice. A series of choices, made during the war and made after it. So let's go back. Back to when she's still useful. Back to when they still call her a favorite. 1940, 1941. Central Europe. Hungary, Slovakia, Poland. The borderlands between Nazi occupation and uneasy neutrality. You need to picture the geography. Mountains, forests, border posts, patrols. These aren't the clean lines you see on a map. These are places where you can disappear, by choice or by force. Christine and another agent, Andrei Kowarsky, later known as Andrew Kennedy, use skiing trips as cover. Wealthy exiles taking a holiday. That's the story. The reality. They're carrying reports, microfilm, and intelligence across borders that are supposed to be sealed. They're gathering information on German troop movements, on supply lines, on Nazi atrocities in occupied Poland, on what the Polish resistance is doing, who's still fighting, who's been crushed. They're building networks with Jewish contacts, diplomats, anyone who can feed them pieces of the puzzle. And they're getting it back to London. Think about that for a second. You're crossing a frozen ridge at night. One slip, you die. One search, you disappear into a cell labeled terrorist or spy or nothing at all. And somewhere in London, men you will never meet, whose names you don't know, will take what you've carried over that mountain and use it to decide strategy. They'll move armies based partly on what you've risked your life to bring them. And if you fail, they'll find someone else. The intelligence Christine brings back is unusually accurate, daring in how it's obtained. Exactly the kind of ground truth Churchill's war machine needs about Nazi-occupied Europe. She's reporting on German buildup before Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Human intelligence that cross-checks with signals intelligence, with what Bletchley Park is pulling out of encrypted German communications. She's not operating in a vacuum. She's part of a web. But she's one of the people actually in the field, actually on the borders, actually taking the risk. Then, inevitably, it goes wrong. She and Kowarsky are arrested by the Gestapo in Hungary. The details are murky. Border security, suspicious documents, someone talking. Doesn't matter. They're in Gestapo custody, and that's usually the end of the story. Here's what happens next. In her cell, Christine bites her own tongue, hard, until it bleeds. She coughs blood, spits blood, makes herself look like she's suffering from advanced tuberculosis. Contagious, dangerous. A doctor is called. The doctor panics. Tuberculosis in a prison means infected guards, infected officers, an outbreak nobody wants to deal with. He pushes for their release. Better to expel them than risk infection spreading. And it works. They're expelled rather than executed. Stop and think about that. It's easy to call someone fearless from a safe distance, sitting in your chair, watching a documentary. But what do you call the person who mutilates herself on purpose because she's calculated, in the moment, in a cell, with no backup, that her own blood is the only argument the Gestapo doctor will listen to. What kind of mind works that way? What kind of pressure do you have to live under to make that calculation and then follow through? Christine Granville doesn't break. She doesn't wait for rescue. She creates her own leverage out of her own body. And then, as soon as she's free, she goes straight back to work. Back in London, back in Cairo, where SOE has regional headquarters, her reports are being read. And the assessments are clear, unusually accurate, daringly obtained, exactly the kind of material we need. Later testimonies, biographies, memoirs from people who worked in SOE and SIS start using a specific phrase, Churchill's favorite spy. Not because he's sending her love letters, not because they're having long conversations, but because she delivers, because she takes insane risks, and because her work fits perfectly into his doctrine, set Europe ablaze. When we say favorite spy, we picture something personal, don't we? A special relationship, a bond. But the reality is colder. London liked Christine Granville because she kept bringing back intelligence you could plug straight into war plans. She was useful, consistently, brilliantly useful. So here's the question. Would they have liked her as much if she'd failed just once? If the doctor in that Gestapo cell hadn't believed her bluff? If she'd disappeared into a mass grave somewhere in Hungary? Because favorite in wartime intelligence doesn't mean beloved. It means most reliably effective until further notice. Remember that. We'll come back to it. By 1943, Christine's reputation is solidifying. She's proven herself in Central Europe. She's survived multiple close calls. And now SOE has a new mission profile for her. Bigger, riskier, more directly tied to Allied military operations. France. If you think these stories exist to make you comfortable, keep watching. Because Act 3 is where the legend gets built, and where you start to see the cracks in what favorite really costs. 1944. Christine Granville joins SOE's F section, France section, operating with the French resistance in the southeastern Alps. Let's ground this in what's happening. D-Day is coming. The Allies are preparing to invade Normandy. But Normandy isn't the whole picture. You need to tie up German forces across France. You need sabotage, disruption, intelligence, coordination with resistance networks, so that when the invasion happens, the Germans can't respond effectively. That's where SOE comes in. And that's where Christine comes in. She's parachuted in. No uniform. No clear legal status. If she's caught, the Geneva Conventions don't protect her. She's a saboteur, a spy, an unlawful combatant. The Gestapo can do whatever they want. Her tasks: courier work between Maquis groups, French resistance fighters in rural areas, liaison between resistance and Allied command, coordinating supply drops, weapons, explosives, sabotage operations, troop movements. You're Polish, operating in France for a British organization against a German occupation. You speak French, but your accent marks you as foreign. You have no uniform, no legal protection. If you're caught, nobody has to admit you exist. And you're doing it anyway. Why? What drives someone to do that? Is it ideology? Revenge for what happened to Poland? Belief in the Allied cause? Or is it something simpler and darker? That once you've crossed a certain line, once you've tasted that kind of risk, peacetime feels like a slow death. Christine works with Maquis groups in the Vercors, the Drôme, the Alps. She's moving between cells, carrying messages, identifying drop zones for supplies. She's part of the network that's preparing southern France for the Allied landings. not just Normandy, but also Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France in August 1944. And then, in the summer of 1944, she pulls off the operation that will define her legend. 3 SOE agents are captured near Digne-les-Bains. One of them is her commanding officer, Francis Kammertz. They're in Gestapo custody. They've been interrogated. The executions are scheduled. This is how it normally ends. You're caught, you're tortured for whatever information you have, and then you're shot, or hanged, or shipped to a concentration camp. The Gestapo doesn't do mercy. Christine hears about the capture, and instead of running, instead of trying to rebuild the network without them, she walks in. She poses as a relative of a British officer. She spins a story about Allied forces closing in, about a local uprising that will follow if the prisoners are killed, about reprisals. She mixes charm, bluff, and implied threats. She's betting her life on whether her story will be believed. And it works. The Gestapo releases them, which takes more courage, planting a bomb under a bridge or walking into a Gestapo office unarmed and betting your life on whether your lie is good enough. Because here's the thing about courage. We like to picture it as physical. Charging a machine gun nest, jumping out of a plane. But sometimes courage is sitting across a desk from someone who has the power to kill you, looking them in the eye, and lying so convincingly that they let you walk out with 3 condemned men. That's not just courage, that's nerve. That's psychological warfare on a level most people can't even imagine, and it has strategic impact. Those 3 agents continue operating. Local resistance coordination holds. The region is stabilized for the Allied advance through southern France. One woman's words: 3 lives saved. A resistance network preserved. But she's not done. There's another episode, less famous but arguably more strategically significant. A Polish unit that's been forced to fight for the Germans is stationed in the Alps. They're defending German positions, but they're Poles, and they hate it. Christine makes contact. She speaks their language, literally and figuratively. She's a Pole. She's working for the Allies. She can offer them a way out. And through negotiation, persuasion, and sheer credibility, she helps flip them. They defect to the Allies, which means German defensive positions in the region collapse. It's tempting to call her just a spy, just an individual operator. But when one woman's words help flip an armed unit on a mountain pass, you're looking at something closer to a scalpel in the enemy's body. A precision cut that bleeds out a position. How many of the big, clean arrows we see on historical maps, Allied advance through southern France, how many of those depend on moments like this? Moments that aren't recorded in the official histories because they happen in a tavern, on a hillside, in a whispered conversation. Reports of Christine's exploits circulate through SOE, through SIS. Her reputation isn't just brave anymore. It's unnervingly effective. The kind of person you send when you need something impossible done. By the end of 1944, the war in Europe is winding down. The Allies are advancing. The Germans are retreating. The end is in sight. And that's when Christine Granville's real problems begin. Because systems built on war don't know what to do with their weapons when the war is over. If you think she's going to get the life she earned, you haven't been paying attention. Let's clarify something before we go further. Did Winston Churchill sit in a bunker chatting with Christine Granville for hours? Probably not. Did they have a personal relationship where he knew the details of her life, her struggles, her fears? Almost certainly not. But did his war machine lean on the intelligence she risked everything to bring? Repeatedly. Maybe the real question isn't whether Churchill knew her personally. Maybe the question is, What does it mean to be someone's favorite in a system built to spend human lives? Because that's what intelligence services do during war. They spend people. They calculate acceptable losses. They praise results and quietly bury failures. Christine Granville was praised because she produced results. Her reports were singled out. Her operations were used as case studies. Her name came up in briefings. And so, later, people who worked with her, people who read the files, they say, Churchill's favorite spy. It's praise, but it's also a measurement of utility. 1944, 1945. The war ends. Christine Granville is awarded the George Medal, the OBE, the Croix de Guerre from France. There are ceremonies, citations, official gratitude, speeches about bravery and service, and then SOE is wound down. The organization that ran her missions, that sent her into occupied Europe, that relied on her, dissolved. Many of its records are destroyed or classified. Christine is demobilized. And here's what that means in practice. She's denied automatic British citizenship despite everything she's done. She's left to survive on her own. The jobs she can get? Waitress, shop assistant, stewardess on a cruise ship, low paid, casual, no security. You risk your life on 3 continents. You face the Gestapo and win. You save Allied agents from execution. You help flip military units. You get decorated by 2 governments, and then you're told to go away and start again as a waitress. At what point does favorite start to sound like a sick joke? This isn't unique to Christine. A lot of SOE agents, especially women, especially foreign nationals, get dropped after the war. The Official Secrets Act means they can't even talk about what they did. They can't use their wartime experience on a resume because it's classified. So they disappear back into civilian life, carrying trauma, carrying secrets, carrying the weight of everything they saw and did. And nobody knows. Nobody cares. Christine struggles, financially, emotionally. She moves between jobs, between relationships. There are reports of her trying to reconnect with people from her wartime network, trying to find a place in a world that has no use for her anymore. Some biographers and commentators argue that Christine inspired aspects of Ian Fleming's James Bond world, specifically characters like Vesper Lynd. Fleming worked in naval intelligence during the war. He would have known of her. And the archetype is there, brilliant, dangerous, foreign, doomed. But real life isn't a novel. Real life is messier, uglier. Christine has relationships that don't hold. She has financial problems that don't resolve. She has nightmares nobody can help her with. And she has Dennis Muldowney, a coworker on the cruise ship, who becomes obsessed with her. She rejects him. He doesn't accept the rejection. We say we honor our heroes. We put up statues. We give speeches. We hand out medals. But outside the ceremonies, outside the official record, how many of them are quietly broken, sidelined, or left unprotected? What does it say about a country that it was easier for Christine Granville to survive the Gestapo than a knife in a London corridor? Because here's the thing. She survived the war. She survived missions that should have killed her a dozen times over. And then, in peacetime, in a cheap hotel in London, she's murdered by a man who couldn't take no for an answer. June 15th, 1952. Earl's Court. Dennis Muldowney stabs her to death in the hallway outside her room. He's arrested, tried, convicted, hanged. Christine Granville is buried in a small ceremony. A few friends, a few ex-colleagues, no state funeral, no Churchill, no government representatives, a Polish expat, a footnote, a trivia question in spy history. If that feels like an open wound, that's because it is. Because this isn't just about one woman. It's about what systems do to the people they use. It's about who we remember and who we throw away. And it's about what we're doing right now, today, to the people carrying our ugliest truths. But we're not done yet, because the story doesn't end with her death. It ends with us, with what we choose to do with stories like hers. Let's bring this back to facts. Strip away the emotion for a moment and ask, what did Christine Granville actually accomplish? Intelligence from Central Europe, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, that fed into the Allied understanding of Nazi troop movements, resistance networks, and the build-up to Operation Barbarossa. Support for French resistance networks in the Alps, coordination between Maquis groups and Allied command, sabotage operations that tied up German forces during the Southern France campaign, the rescue of 3 SOE agents from Gestapo custody, preserving a functioning resistance network in a critical region, the defection of a Polish unit fighting for Germany, collapsing defensive positions in the Alps. No, Christine Granville didn't single-handedly win the war. Nobody did. Wars aren't won by individuals. They're won by logistics, by industrial production, by millions of people doing millions of tasks. But here's the question. Remove her from the picture, and what changes? Certain reports don't arrive. Certain agents don't live. Certain units don't change sides. How many of our big, clean textbook campaign arrows, those nice lines showing Allied advances, how many of those rely on people like her, whose names never make it into the caption? The historian's answer is, we don't know. Because history doesn't do counterfactuals well. We can't rerun the war without her and see what's different. But we can look at the assessments written by the people who worked with her. And they're consistent, uniquely effective, willing to take risks others wouldn't, critical to operations in multiple theaters. She mattered. Operationally, strategically, in ways that don't fit neatly into a 2-paragraph textbook summary. So why don't more people know her name? Official secrecy. SOE records were classified for decades. Many were destroyed. The Official Secrets Act meant people couldn't talk about what they did, even after the war. Sexism and xenophobia. She was a woman in a male-dominated field. She was Polish in a British system. She didn't fit the mold of the hero they wanted to celebrate. Institutional embarrassment. The way she was treated after the war, demobilized, left to struggle, murdered, reflects badly on the system. Easier to let her fade into obscurity than to ask uncomfortable questions about how Britain treated its wartime agents. But there's another layer, a deeper one. Looking back, it's easy to say, of course she was a hero. Of course we should have treated her better. Hindsight is comfortable. It lets us distance ourselves from the people who made those decisions. Harder question. Right now, in your own world, when someone quietly does the dangerous, unglamorous work that keeps the system honest, do you treat them as a hero or as a problem? Because this pattern doesn't stop with Christine Granville. Look at technical specialists who blow the whistle on misconduct. Look at field operatives who report abuses. Look at journalists who dig into uncomfortable truths. Look at anyone who carries the ugly reality nobody wants to hear. What happens to them? They get praised for about 5 minutes. Then they get sidelined, discredited. Their careers dry up. Their finances collapse. And when they're no longer useful, when the spotlight moves on, they're left to fend for themselves. Sound familiar? Let's name names, not to be provocative, but because this is the point. Daniel Ellsberg, Pentagon Papers. revealed the truth about the Vietnam War, spent years facing prosecution, Chelsea Manning, leaked evidence of war crimes, imprisoned, tortured, released, still struggling. Edward Snowden, exposed mass surveillance, exiled. Can't return home. Reality winner. Leaked information about Russian election interference, imprisoned. You can argue about whether any of these people did the right thing. You can argue about methods, about legality, about consequences. But here's what you can't argue. Every one of them carried a truth that was too heavy, too uncomfortable, too dangerous for the system to acknowledge. And every one of them paid for it. The pattern is this. We honor truth-tellers in retrospect. We build them memorials 50 years later. We make documentaries. We say, how could they have been treated that way? And while we're saying that, we're doing the exact same thing to the people carrying today's uncomfortable truths. Christine Granville is not ancient history. She's a warning, a mirror, a question we keep refusing to answer. Here's the brutal reality. History is written by the people who control the narrative, and the narrative is almost always about the people at the top, the generals, the politicians, the public faces. Churchill gets the spotlight. Deservedly, in many ways, he held Britain together during the darkest period of the war. But the spotlight is a narrow beam, and everything outside it, all the people who made his decisions possible, who carried his intelligence, who risked their lives so he could move pins on a map, they're in the dark. Not because they didn't matter, but because acknowledging them complicates the myth. What if the real story of World War II isn't about great men making great decisions? What if it's about 10,000 people like Christine Granville, people whose names we don't know, doing impossible things in impossible circumstances so that the people whose names we do know could claim the victory? What if the entire structure of how we tell history is designed to erase the people who actually did the work? And if that's true, if we've been telling the story wrong this whole time, what else are we getting wrong right now? Here's where we stop talking about Christine Granville and start talking about you. Because this documentary exists for a reason. Not to make you feel good, not to give you a neat story with a comfortable ending, but to put a question in front of you that you can't ignore. When someone does the dangerous, unglamorous work that keeps the system honest, do you stand with them or do you look away? When a story makes you uncomfortable because it reveals something ugly about institutions you trust, do you dig deeper or do you change the channel? When the system praises someone as a favorite but then throws them away, do you notice or do you just move on to the next story? Christine Granville can't answer those questions. She's been dead for over 70 years. But you can. Drop one name below, historical or modern. Someone who carried the truth at a cost. Someone whose work stayed invisible while others took the credit. A radio operator, a code breaker, a resistance courier, a whistleblower. Anyone. If we don't name them, nobody will. This is where we start putting the right names in the record. Let's bring it back to where we started. A body in a corridor. Earl's Court, London, 1952. A Polish aristocrat who walked into war rather than away from it, who skied across frozen borders carrying intelligence, who survived Gestapo prisons by betting on her own blood, who walked into occupied France with no legal protection, who talked Nazi officers into releasing condemned agents, who flipped military units with words and credibility, who was awarded the George Medal, the OBE, the Croix de Guerre, who was demobilized and left to work as a waitress, who was murdered in a cheap hotel by a man who couldn't take rejection, whose name most people have never heard. The question isn't just why Christine Granville was forgotten. The question is, who are we forgetting right now? Who's doing the work that matters, carrying the truths that hurt, taking the risks nobody else will, while we look the other way? And when they're gone, when they've been spent and discarded, will we build them a memorial 50 years too late and pretend we would have treated them better? Or will we do something different this time? If you care more about the people history buried in the footnotes than the ones it put on posters, subscribe. This channel exists to drag the real architecture of war, intelligence, and power into the light. If that matters to you, be part of it. If Christine Granville shouldn't stay a trivia question, push this video a little further. 1 like, 1 share. That's how stories outrun the silence that swallowed them the first time. And don't just watch. Put names below. Radio operators, code breakers, resistance couriers, whistleblowers, anyone whose work stayed invisible while others took the credit. If we don't name them, nobody will.